Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant and welcome back to Elite Dangerous. VR for Odyssey remains a highly requested feature, and whilst there's still a chance that it may happen at some point in the future after release, chances are very high that it's not going to be an easy thing to implement. For those who aren't aware, and to very quickly bring you up to date, Frontier have stated that VR support will not be an Odyssey for launch. Later, Frontier clarified that VR is something that they are investigating for the update. However, any implementation is still very much a case of when and if. It's certainly not guaranteed. More recently, Frontier clarified this a little more in a live stream, stating that VR will be remaining in place for the vanilla version of Elite and Horizons, but as of now, VR is not being actively developed for Odyssey, as they are investigating how and if to best implement virtual reality support. So then, what is the issue really? After all, Elite already supports VR and is widely considered to be one of the best seated VR experiences, so why isn't Odyssey supporting this right out of the gate? Well, it's likely there are a lot of reasons for this, so let's take a look. Now, whilst Elite certainly has one of the best seated VR experiences, its use of VR has remained largely unchanged since 2014. That's 6 entire years. During that time, VR has moved on tremendously. It's more or less left Elite standing in the dust in many regards, particularly when talking about standing room scale experiences. Odyssey, of course, will involve walking around, so its use of VR will need to be vastly more than just simple seated experiences. This is 2020 after all, it's no longer 2014, where seated experiences were both the norm and acceptable. If Odyssey is to use movement-based VR then, there is going to be a lot of work needed to go into it. Many of the recent VR titles show exactly what is needed and how well this can work. Case in point is Half-Life Alyx, easily the best VR title currently available. It's in a class of its own when it comes to interacting with the environment, but it's far from alone. Boneworks, Asgard's Wrath, Stormland and many more are all good examples of what is needed to support walking around inside VR. In short, you can't simply attach a VR camera to an in-game avatar and call it a day. Such implementation would be a terrible experience and would likely widely and quite rightly be slated. But that's not all. Odyssey is in a unique position when it comes to movement. Different planets of course have different gravity, and this will pose its own set of issues for any potential VR implementation. How do you represent this in an effective manner, and how do you do so without inducing motion sickness? These are problems that haven't been solved yet, as no other VR game has attempted to deal with them. It's a challenge unique to Elite and would require a vast amount of research by Frontier before they even think about beginning development on VR. Low gravity isn't the only hurdle though, there's also zero gravity to think about. Now it's true that so far Frontier have only talked about walking on planets, however walking around inside ships and space stations is an obvious choice, and one which Frontier would be foolish to miss out on. As artificial gravity doesn't exist within the Elite universe, it means that Frontier also needs to develop zero-G movement, and this again poses another huge hurdle for VR. However, here there are some other examples to follow. Lone Echo, the Oculus title set purely in a zero-G environment, shows how well this can work. Using the environment to assist with moving around, the player has to use grab handles, walls, floors and ceilings to move around. The player also has access to personal thrusters to assist with getting from A to B. For Oculus, developing this feature was an entire game. It's a massive amount of work and Odyssey VR would need to match it to be effective. All the while, unlike Lone Echo, this would only be a small subset of the overall VR work that Odyssey would require. Okay then, so far we have only considered the simple process of moving around, and I say simple there in quote marks because obviously it really isn't simple. And if we start to look beyond just moving around, there's also interacting with the whole world to consider. How will guns and weapons work in VR? Now sure, Frontier could use the simple route of just binding a gun to a control stick and mirror the same gameplay input as used on a monitor. But virtually no effective VR title does that nowadays, and to be perfectly honest, it would be a terrible solution for VR. Now Stormland shows the bare minimum that would be required for a decent VR weapon implementation. Boneworks and Half-Life Alyx show the ideal implementation. As you can see in the video clips here, this is about as far removed from attaching a weapon to a gamepad as you can get. Yet at this point in the life cycle of VR, this is becoming more or less required. I could go on further. What about interacting with the world in general? And how about the UI? VR will need its own UI for sure. And added to all of this, how do Frontier maintain any semblance of balance between VR and non-VR users? Now let's be perfectly clear. None of these are hurdles that cannot be overcome. This work can be done. It's been done many times before in other games. It's all entirely possible. However, the real issue is that it's a monumental amount of work. And if Frontier do not go to this level of development for VR in Odyssey, then to be perfectly blunt, the VR support would be bad and more than lacking. Bottom line, if Frontier are going to do it, it's got to be done properly. I can fully understand why doing this amount of work is an open question for them. All that said, and moving on to a tangent subject, some people have put forth the idea that VR support could be implemented in a limited form. That is, simply attaching a VR camera to the player's avatar and relying on regular motion inputs. Basically, the idea here is to break all modern conventions and implement VR in a 2014 form. The catch? Adding it as a beta development with no guarantees that its support will be either continued or supported. This overcomes a number of problems. It allows Frontier to add a basic support without having to worry about it too much. And as in this imaginary situation it's only a beta edition, it's not final, it would make it perfectly clear to people that this isn't the intended experience. The added benefit to this is that it would allow players to experience a very basic form of VR in Odyssey. It's honestly not a bad idea at all, and whilst I can see a lot of people not bothering with such an implementation, myself among them, I can also see it being a very welcome addition for a lot of other VR users. In the end, whether or not Frontier do go for the VR route with Odyssey is still very much an open question, and one with a lot of unknown answers. Whilst it certainly came as a surprise to hear that VR wouldn't be in Odyssey by default, it's certainly a decision that I can understand for all the reasons I mentioned in this video. Meanwhile, on the subject of Odyssey, Frontier will be releasing their first dev diary on the update later this month. They have said that it will contain new info that they haven't discussed yet for the expansion. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing more. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.